I had a couple of choices I could make. I could choose to retire to a small farm and do what I had dreamed of doing for 20 years in the military and just raise my children and be a small farmer or whatever else I chose to do. Or I could try and fix what I saw was a very broken system that was damaging families. And it was kind of through that process that I began opening up other doors of government and looking at criminal justice, looking at pieces of legislation that are currently in place today and how they're impacting our communities. And I just felt that I could offer so much more to the state of Illinois than what we're currently being offered. I felt that after that time in the military, I had garnered a tremendous amount of not only leadership experience, but just the tangibles that you can't get anywhere else, of working in extreme environments that are hazardous to not only your mission, but to the people that are conducting that mission, working with a very diverse group of men and women from all across, not just the nation, but the world, in understanding how we work together despite our differences to accomplish a common goal. And I think after doing that repeatedly for 20 years, it really equipped me for public service.
What was it about your case that led you to the governor's office? I mean, I could see this happening to you and deciding you want to be a family law attorney or some other route, something closer to the court system. Why this office?
Well, I just really believe that as the senior most executive leader here in the state, where I'm not in charge of legislation, I think really it might have been a different approach as a legislator, where then I kind of have more control over writing and passing legislation, and I don't think that's how I should lead. I think the best leadership route for me is to engage with people on a much larger spectrum, not just in a local House seat somewhere, because I know this is impacting our entire state, much like criminal court is, much like probate court, as well as just, the issues we all face every single day that are impacting us. And I believe that the experience I've garnered after 2 decades of military service has readily equipped me for that office to lead, and that's definitely what I think that our state is lacking. It's lacking somebody that has that ability to listen to different ideas and not draw a partisan line, and really I can take an unbiased approach. And I think that that's something that we've never really had in our governor's office, where I don't have a party boss to answer to. I don't have large political action committees or lobbyists or special interest groups pulling my strings. Of course, I'm a low budget guy. I've made it at least in front of you guys and onto NBC with about $25,000, and I think that says something for how I can stretch a dollar. And I just felt that this was the office that I needed to run in.
Can you talk specifically about what threats to our freedom you want to address specifically?
Certainly. I believe that. If we could start with the minor, I guess, and I'll just kind of transition over to something more extreme. And something as minor as red light cameras. I believe that they violate individuals' due process rights, their constitutional rights, and this is a very simple example of where your guilt is adjudicated without ever having been in front of a judge. They've already determined that based upon a license plate number that you committed a quasi-criminal penalty worthy of fining you for, and I believe that that's the wrong way to go about doing business. It would really be no different than, and I'm going to transition into gun laws, but if I loaned somebody one of my guns to go hunting with, and that gun was used in the commission of a crime, a murder or robbery, and then I was adjudicated as being guilty because, well, the gun was registered in my name. That is not how due process is supposed to work. You should be able to confront your accuser. You have the right to an attorney, and with the amount in question, you have a right to a trial by jury. And those things are not afforded underneath the way it's currently structured. They just mail you your ticket and expect that you pay it. And whenever those are contested, and I contested one, I got one of them, and I contested it and submitted evidence to them, and the letter that was returned to me was, well, a judge reviewed it and still found that you're guilty. I'm like, I never even got to talk to my accuser. And so that's something very simple, but which also can transition over into gun laws. Some of the gun laws that we see that are being pushed throughout the General Assembly I don't believe they're with a measure of intent to actually curbing violence. I believe that it's meant that the intention for many of these gun laws is the intention of perpetuating defending a political base or a political ideology, and not necessarily addressing root causes of violence. And I think a great example of that is Deerfield, for instance. They passed the gun ban on AR-15s, and they extended that with, I believe, high-capacity magazines and certain other weaponry. But whenever I took a look at that, well, there's no deaths in Deerfield with an AR-15. So why are we expending taxpayer resources to ban something that has never been used to kill somebody in Deerfield? And when I expand that knowledge, and I look out and I do a little more digging, and I look into the city of Chicago, where it's, of course, we have very, very high crime here. There's a lot of violence here, average about 600 murders a year. And I take a look at those numbers. How many people have been killed with an AR-15 in the city of Chicago? Very few, I believe probably less than 5. In fact, with all rifles combined in the state of Illinois, it doesn't even match how many people have been killed with hands or with knives. And so we're not even beginning to prioritize what we would look at addressing. Why are there no discussions on those items? See, I want to have a much broader discussion, not on guns. Guns are important, and they're used in commissions of crimes every single day. I would agree with that. But I want to focus on the intent. What drives, what are the underlying root causes?
What are they, in your opinion?
I believe that they're primarily economic is one, a lack of job and resources, which created a black market for drugs, and as drugs were beginning to be used, men were primarily breadwinners whenever the war on drugs was kind of launched. And during that era, when those families were struggling, they went to alternative means. You see, we're going to do anything that we feel necessary that we have to do to provide for our families, up to and including selling drugs. And I think as a result, those communities have been disproportionately affected, and more fathers were stripped out of the homes. That resulted in mothers having to work 2 to 3 jobs to provide for their families. And as these children grew in age, they of course were being raised by the streets because dad's in prison, mom's working full time. And so they gravitate towards other children that are just like themselves.
What can a governor do about that?
Well, I believe that a governor can be in those communities. They can work to identify with local legislators to identify any types of regulations or hurdles that are preventing businesses and entrepreneurs from expanding and really being able to get a solid footing in these communities. Whenever I speak within the black community, what do they want? They want jobs. They want crime under control. And I believe that it all ties in, and we have to address it together. We have to address the fact that disproportionately, children are at far greater risk of growing up in a single-parent home, that as a result of that, they're also at far greater risk of having emotional and mental and behavioral disorders, being placed on different types of psychotropic drugs and pharmaceuticals. And I believe that all of that, again, is tying into what's hurting and harming these communities, which ties into the violence. When we take a look at and we address the statistics of high school dropouts, teen pregnancy, abortion, suicide, depression, there's a very common factor. It's not the determining factor, but it's very common. We have to begin to work to restore the family unit. So to answer your question directly, where can I work to address that? I believe that I can work to end the war on drugs in the state of Illinois, address it for what it truly is, which is an economic and a health issue. I believe that if we build the economy in those regions and we provide viable opportunities for every single community that is out there, then we're going to see fewer and fewer drugs being sold on the street. We're going to have fewer parents being arrested and incarcerated, and we're going to give much more of an opportunity to our children because they're going to have much more stable home environments.
Have you been to some of these communities?
I have, yes.
And so how do you convince a manufacturer, an automaker, whatever you're envisioning, to come to a part of town in the city where regulations are high, taxes are high, crime is high, to take a chance on a community like that?
Well, I think it's block by block. I think that we honestly have to roll up our sleeves and we have to go one block at a time. My campaign kind of got a large part of its kick and its start, I guess, right in Inglewood. Inglewood, as a matter of fact, is where I went to at the Cusano Cafe, and I met with the very first person to work on my campaign. And she had previously worked on Bernie Sanders' campaign, and she saw the work that I did out in Standing Rock, North Dakota, whenever I went out there, and she believed in my message and what I was bringing. And that was the first time that I got the opportunity to go into that neighborhood. And I think what I see there isn't just urban blight and people struggling. I do see that, but what I see is an opportunity, that we really have an opportunity to enact a fundamental change in how we address politics and how we deal with the most vulnerable in our state.
But as governor, how do you end the war on drugs? Or like, do you enact laws? Like, do you work to change
Certainly,
laws?
yeah. I believe that this is an area in which we can gain support on both sides of the political aisle, especially this being a heavily Democratic controlled region. I firmly believe that we can work to pass legislation that for those that are merely committed or convicted for offenses for, just say, possession of cannabis, for instance, we'll use that as an example, that why arrest that individual? Okay, I think that we made a positive stride, and for less than 10 grams, merely just awarding a ticket for that, just a fine for that. But I think we can go beyond that. I believe that we could begin analyzing everybody that's incarcerated currently, right now, for victimless crimes, where they were either convicted for the manufacture, distribution, or possession of narcotics, but they never harmed another person. Okay, I'm not talking about somebody who actually harmed another person or property, only for a victimless crime. And we can begin to look at transitioning them into work release programs and back into their communities.
Mr. Jackson, you had me for a moment there, but I can manufacture and distribute narcotics, and by your definition, I've not hurt anybody?
By my definition, yes.
Well, at what point do I start to hurt somebody?
If you physically harm another person.
Well, I suspect if I'm selling them to your kids, you're not going to be very happy with me.
Well, let me ask you this.
I'll give it.
Let me ask you this. And I polled, I was over at Eisenhower High School in Decatur, predominantly minority school, and I spent 2 hours speaking with these students. And I asked by a show of hands, today, if drugs were legalized, all drugs were legalized, would you guys, who in here by show of hands would rush out and purchase drugs? And no hands went up. You see, how we raise our children and how we influence them, that is the ultimate deciding factor in what our children choose to do. Drugs and the war on drugs prohibition has failed miserably. Much like prohibition on alcohol failed miserably, I'm not advocating for use whatsoever. I believe that drugs are dangerous, that most of them are dangerous. But when I analyze and see what's killing the majority of Americans, it's not drugs. It's things that are perfectly legal today. Things that are sold every single day on nearly every street corner in the United States. And it's the choices that we're making as a society which is determining the ultimate outcome on if somebody dies or prematurely or is killed. It's about education and ensuring that they know the risk associated with these things. I think if we begin to do that, we're going to turn the tide in the war on drugs, because there still is a war against drugs, but we're losing it every day because of our approach. We've tried a methodology of deterrence based upon incarcerating people for significant periods of time. Yet the data doesn't support that stricter sentences result in fewer convictions. They still happen every single day, and we're removing countless people off the streets. And it has not curbed the war on drugs. If we're going to curb the war on drugs, I suggest that we begin, again, with the predominant resources, or what we need to address, and that is jobs and restoring the family unit. If the economy is there and the family unit is predominantly intact or involved in the rearing of those children, those kids are going to make good choices. And they're going to
So-
say to that drug dealer, no, I'm not doing that.
So because it's part of your campaign and it's come up, you're in a very heated, I think, custody battle still, and there are questions about whether or not you've made your child support payments.
Mhm.
Do you find it a little ironic that you're talking about family unit needing to be together and not having mom have to work 2 jobs when,
Absolutely not.
okay, set the record straight, what's going on?
Yeah, it's definitely not ironic. It is, there's over 101 researchers that came together and that determined that for children, the very best scenarios, number 1, is being raised with their biological mom and dad. That's scenario number 1. That's the best. But we do not live in a predominantly nuclear family society any longer. We live in a society in which there are many blended households. And unfortunately, much like my own, the majority of fathers over decades in this state, just like across the rest of the country, have been relegated down to mere visitors to their children. And every other weekend model not only harms those children and the relationship and the influence by that other parent, whether it's mother or father, we are not doing right by our kids. I believe that what I've been doing in fighting to reform family law, I didn't just, not pay child support. I paid child support for over 12 years on my oldest son with no issues. I held a top secret clearance and was a reserve sheriff's deputy for Lake County for several years. As journalists, I would think and hope that we would ask much deeper questions before me ever setting foot into the editorial board of how did a guy serve 20 years, have a top secret clearance, volunteer hundreds of hours with the sheriff's department, and now all of a sudden he's a deadbeat father? That doesn't make any sense.
Can you just tell us where things stand now?
Certainly. I still have some catching up to do. I'm a little bit behind still, but I have been unsuccessful in my attempts to get the judge, Judge Salvi, to lower that order. He set it significantly high in the beginning, and
You mean a dollar amount? I'm sorry, I'm not. He said it.
I believe it's a couple $1,000s that I'm still behind. I told him, Your Honor, I cannot meet that obligation. I can't. I have an older son I've been providing for 12 years, and you're literally going to be robbing me of being able to provide for him. Now, mind you, I was active duty military still at the time. And so I began to fall behind immediately. I paid over $100,000 in support.
2,000 a monthly. I'm sorry to be.
You want the monthly amount?
No,
You're asking?
I'm just trying to figure the 2,000 is that's an in arrears amount.
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yes.
not a monthly amount that is not.
Right.
being
My
paid.
monthly amount is close to about $2,700 a month. It averages based upon how much child care she utilizes. And in this state, when they combine child care and extracurricular activities on top of the support order, we're taking 40 and 50% of people's income. Now, let me just throw a scenario in front of you. Any of you married and with children? You are. Okay. So if right now, could you or the average American or Illinois household take on an additional mortgage or rent? The average family couldn't. The average family median household income is $59,000 a year. And so to take on another whole set of expenses without any increase in income, of course something's going to hurt. Something's going to fall short. I've offered to do childcare 5 days a week. I take my kids to extracurricular activities, do homework with them, feed them dinner, do everything that a father should do, and then some. And that's what we should be working towards. I want to end the conflict and the adversarial system known as family court, which draws out for long periods of time these family court matters. If there's involved parents, moms or dads, because I got some great moms right here in Chicago fighting the same fight I am right now, and they want to be more involved, why are we denying that? Why would we deny more time of our children with their parents who love them, and up until that divorce and custody proceeding were significantly involved? Why would we allow a system like that to remain in place and intact?
I'm still just unclear as to why this is the role of the governor. This
Th-
again
this
feels
isn't-
like you should, if these are county systems, you're working through Lake County's legal system. and
This
family court.
isn't just a county. This is
But if you're-
statewide legislation.
So that, okay, let's talk about that. So you would want to change what in
I would
state
like,
statute
I would like to
that is
move to a
impacting it.
rebuttable presumption of 50-50 shared parenting. A rebuttable presumption leaving the 17 different criteria in place that judges currently use in making custody determinations, that would remain. So if a parent was unfit, if they were incarcerated for drugs, if they were convicted of domestic violence, any of those factors, judge can still say, yep, it doesn't warrant in this case, we're not awarding 50-50 custody, these are my written findings, this is why. Very simple, and if the judge was wrong and erred in their ruling, then it's documented, and it's very easy for a more accurate appeal from that parent. I believe that is the first step. Secondly, I believe that we should address how we deal with child support. It makes no sense whatsoever to suspend driver's license and professional licenses and incarcerating people into debtor's prisons for what really amounts to an inability to pay. And in a family court where you have no right to an attorney, no right to a trial by jury, and they can circumvent the Constitution and just put you into a debtor's prison, I believe that's a flawed system. And I believe that we need to change that, because that does, again, especially in our poorer communities and those that lack the economic or educational resources to defend themselves in court, all they do is they go in front of the judge says, you're behind, what have you paid? And they go right from there to up to 6 months in prison. Well, what's going to happen to them when they come back out? They're going to be on average $20,000 in arrears. $20,000. Now you take somebody who just came out of prison, $20,000 in arrears, living in some of these communities where there's very few jobs, what do you think is going to happen to them? They're going to go back to the black market. They're going to sell drugs. They're going to do more criminal offenses. It's a repetitive, repeating cycle that keeps people locked up in it. I want to break them out of it.
So are you saying this should be one of the top priorities for the governor?
I believe that is definitely a top priority for our state, yes. Is it my number one issue? Certainly not. But it's a very important issue. When it's impacting thousands of families, I think it's something we should take notice of.
I guess what your number one issue is?
The fiscal, definitely the fiscal issues in this state. Because that affects all of us, every single one of us.
Wave your wand. What changes?
We go to a 403B or 401K for our pension plans.
Okay. And that by itself would, but
No,
that would leave a tremendous overhang of prior obligations.
of course. We
$130 billion.
billion of unfunded pensions. I
So
believe that's
going forward, basically, I think we've pretty much said the same. But what do we do with 130?
How do we pay it down? I believe we have to reduce state expenditures. We have to work towards where are we spending a significant amount of money. I think one of the first areas we could address where we spend a tremendous amount, about 25% of our budget is eaten up inside dealing with healthcare. We've got over 3 million people right now currently enrolled in Medicaid, and I think that we could really free that up by one of the best models that I've seen to really bring down costs. I don't know if you guys are familiar with direct primary care providers. Y'all familiar with those at all?
I mean, the state's finally getting going with managed care. You don't think that is that a different terminology for managed care, or?
I believe so. I haven't heard the term managed care. But so I was speaking with some doctors. They have some practices here in the state of Illinois. They're relatively few and small, but growing. And in a direct primary care model, they just cut out the insurance. They cut out the middleman, and it's really kind of reverting back to a family doctor where they pay a monthly subscription, $60 to $80. And one example that she gave me, she had a family of 9, and they reduced their insurance cost by over $1,500 a month.
In that model, what happens when child number 4 is diagnosed with cancer?
Well, they still recommend carrying a catastrophic policy. So, and that's what insurance should be used for, right? It's like our car insurance. We don't use it to change our oil or rotate our tires, but that's what insurance has expanded to. And with the involvement of government, I don't think I have to tell you guys, you're very intelligent and you understand that where government gets more involved, well, cost goes up. Cost has risen significantly within education and in healthcare. I think that we could begin to reduce that cost down, driving a more competitive system inside the private sector, breaking down barriers and regulations that make it difficult for these providers to open up their practices and encouraging that. And I think what we're going to see is doctors getting back to their roots of practicing medicine, doing what they really went to school for, and no longer really spending the majority of their time filling out paperwork and shuttling people through a government-run healthcare system. And as an example of that, I had to take my mother was on Medicare, and I took her to several doctor's appointments. We have to understand that coverage does not equal care. It doesn't equate that a person, while maybe covered, it doesn't mean that they're going to walk into that healthcare facility, into that provider, and receive adequate care for whatever issue they have. And that's what I want to ensure is happening, is that they're getting adequate care and they have a fair and equal access to good health care. We don't have that, and I don't believe that government is the answer to the solution. So I don't think an expansion of government-funded health care is going to help us.
So that's a pretty libertarian view. What are some other things that you think you identify with libertarian viewpoints on?
The criminal justice reform that I spoke about. I mean, we've got about 40,000 people currently incarcerated in the state of Illinois. Again, it doesn't take much of a Google search to go back and trace the history of where our incarceration rates skyrocketed and what they were predominantly resulted from. As libertarians, we believe in self-ownership, in regulating yourself and not having government do it for you, that you have the ability and the autonomy to make choices over your own livelihood and your own body, even if they're poor choices. But I don't see incarcerating somebody that never harmed another person. Our police should be used, especially here in Chicago. I mean, the clearance rate for murders are what, 25%? If
lower.
Lower than
that.
that, 17, 18.
And why? Those police resources should be getting utilized to investigate violent crime and property crime, clearing rape kits that are still sitting on shelves. Those are the things that our police should be doing. Not trying to prevent somebody from smoking a joint in their college dorm room. And I believe we don't currently have the resources statewide or in the city of Chicago to spread them out so thin. And I think a more libertarian approach is recognize the war on drugs. It's a flop, hasn't worked. Let's revisit. How do we bring down drug use? I do want to do that. I don't want people using serious drugs, but I think it's a healthcare issue. And if we were to allocate more of that funding towards mental health and emotional and behavioral health facilities, that when people had that type of access and they could go in and get treated for these things that they're dealing with, oftentimes it's, again, as a result of something they incurred in their life prior to ever doing drugs. They struggled with depression and PTSD and anxiety. I mean, you go into some of these communities and they've seen from a young age, they've seen their friends killed on basketball courts. They've seen their family members killed. These are real life issues, just like going to combat. And but they don't get the training and the experience that we get, that you're going to encounter these issues. You're going to encounter these things when you go to war, and we're going to take care of you when you get back. They don't have that. It doesn't exist. So why not allocate more resources instead of sending out teams of police officers and SWAT officers to kick door ins for drugs? Allocate those resources to a mental health service to go out and have a mobile service in the community to see people there that don't have that type of freedom of transportation and access to those facilities. Let's meet the people where they're needed, where they really need help. I believe that we have the resources to do it. We're just not allocating them appropriately.
How do your viewpoints overlay with the public school system? What are we doing wrong there? What would you change?
I was doing a good deal of reading here on the Noble Charter School System here in Chicago. I think there's about, I want to say 17 schools, if I'm correct on my number there, roughly. And they've got a great acceptance rate for college. It's in the high 90s. And these are schools that are targeted towards our poorer communities or underserved communities. I think that's a great model to take a look at. And that whenever I take a look nationally at charter schools, they don't really fare much better as far as grades are concerned on a national level, but they do reduce costs significantly as opposed to their counterparts in the public sector. So I think kind of identifying where our expenditures are going, doing an in-depth audit of each school district and how they're allocating resources. I think that's one of the first steps that we can do. Secondly, I believe that we can look at the fact that we've got over 860 school districts in this state, and other states serve significantly more of a populace with far fewer districts, like the state of Florida. How are they doing that? I mean, we're intelligent people and we're very resourceful, so why aren't we utilizing our resources and knowledge to reach out and find and identify where are we going wrong? I believe that we can really reduce down the number of school districts that we have right now, not consolidation of brick and mortar, but consolidation of administration. Reduce that administrative overhead down to a more acceptable level. What that exact number looks like, I don't know, but I would venture to say somewhere around 500 to 600 school districts. And I believe that we could probably use more of a block grant form to provide fair funding to every single student across the state and make those districts utilize and make those choices appropriately. I don't like big centralized government. I don't want to be mandating from Springfield. I think that's the wrong way to do business. I think that those school districts and the voters inside them need to hold their local officials accountable, and I believe that that can be done, but I think where I should be as governor is there with them. Inside all 102 counties, sitting down with their school boards, sitting down with the voters, and being an actively involved citizen, which I am, across the entirety of the state. And I think that that's how real leadership is formed, and where people kind of come on board and they buy into ideas when they know that you truly care about them and their communities. It's when you're there with them. It's when you're accessible to people and they can sit down and have a conversation like what we're doing, and we can discuss, where's our money going? Oh, well, we've got a school administrator over here. We pay him $275,000 a year, and he's got a 7-figure pension and premium health care benefits.
So you're making a great case for doing a lot of grassroots work, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain again why you're not interested in running for a local office?
Well, again, because this is a statewide effort. The entire state is hurting. It's not just one county. I live in Lake County, and we've got the highest effective property taxes in the state, 17th highest in the nation. But that's not a problem central to Lake County, nor is criminal justice. That is a statewide issue. All of these issues are very important to me. And I think that, again, you have to have a voice that runs somewhere down the middle that can listen to both sides of the aisle, because that's what we're lacking. We don't have individuals in Springfield that are doing that. We have partisan bickering back and forth, and we're not progressing our state.
Who's your voter? You had a chance to be on the stage with the other people running for the race. You watched them kind of interact and like you're discussing bicker. So who is your voter in this race, do you think?
It's the, number one, it's the over 50% of independents and undecideds out there. That's the majority. The majority of us are middle-of-the-road people. We just want common sense brought back to politics, where we can sit down and not argue like school-age children on a stage, but we can sit down and have an adult conversation about difficult issues we're facing, and deal with them appropriately. Make hard choices. We're adults. We have to make hard choices. And the ideal voter are those that are out there that feel disenfranchised. They don't feel like they actually have a voice. And that's what I'm saying. This morning I retweeted from a Twitter supporter. Hardline Democrat, LGBT, resist Trump, resist all, I'm voting for Kash Jackson. Black Lives Matter reach out to me and say that they want to endorse me. I just saw a sitting Republican House rep, and I won't say his name, but I saw him publicly post on Facebook that he was going to endorse me. I haven't reached out to him and asked for an endorsement. Now, how is it that I can gain support from the extreme of Black Lives Matter all the way over to an elected Republican representative? How is that possible? You see, that is the example that we need leading in politics. That is the voice of liberty and what that really looks like for all people. And when people begin to hear that and see that message, they understand that's how it should have been all along. And I believe that I'm the voice to get that done. I may not be the best person for this job, but I'm the best damn person in this race right now for that job.